The battle was over. The dust settled. The shouting faded. And the survivors were no longer soldiers. They were prisoners. Captured. Disarmed. Surrounded. In ancient times, defeat didn't just mean losing the fight. It meant losing your future. Because once the battlefield went silent, a different kind of struggle began. No rules. No mercy. And no guarantee of survival. What happened next wasn't written in heroic stories. It was something darker. Something history rarely talks about. When an ancient battle ended, not everyone died on the field. Some survived. But survival didn't mean safety. It meant capture. Armies moved quickly after victory. The wounded were found. The unarmed were surrounded. Those who tried to run were chased down. Because prisoners were valuable. Not as people, but as assets. In places like ancient Rome, capturing enemies was part of the strategy. A defeated soldier could be turned into labor, sold, or used to display power. The moment of capture was chaotic. Weapons were stripped away. Armor removed. Hands often bound. Identity began to disappear immediately. A soldier who once fought with purpose was now just another body under control. And the uncertainty began instantly. Some prisoners were separated on the spot. Officers, skilled fighters, or those of higher status might be treated differently, for a time. Others, grouped together, marched away from the battlefield. No explanation. No idea where they were going. The journey that followed was often brutal. Long marches, little food, constant guard. Those who slowed down risked being left behind, or worse. Because the victors had no obligation to protect them, only to control them. And as distance grew between the battlefield and the prisoners, one realization slowly settled in. The fight was over. But for them, something else had just begun. The battlefield was left behind. But the suffering didn't end there. For prisoners, the next phase began almost immediately. The march. Long lines of captured soldiers, hands bound or tightly controlled, were forced to move across unfamiliar land. There was no rest, no recovery from wounds, no time to process what had just happened, only movement. Forward, day after day. The journey could last for miles, sometimes weeks. Food was scarce, water limited. Guards controlled everything. And those guards weren't there to help. They were there to keep order. And fear was their tool. If someone slowed down, struggled, or collapsed, there was rarely patience. The column kept moving. Because to the victors, prisoners were replaceable. Not individuals. Just numbers. Some prisoners tried to support each other. Sharing strength. Helping someone stand. Offering what little comfort they could. But even that was risky. Because drawing attention could make things worse. As they moved farther from the battlefield, the reality became clearer. They weren't being taken somewhere temporary. They were being transported into a system. In empires like ancient Rome, these marches often led to cities, markets, or work sites. Places where prisoners would be evaluated. Not for who they were, but for what they could become. A laborer. A servant. A symbol. And as exhaustion set in, one question began to grow heavier with each step. Not where are we going, but what are we being taken for? After endless marches, prisoners finally arrived at their destination. But freedom was still a distant dream. In ancient times, there were no rehabilitation centers, no humane treatment, only evaluation and control. In cities and forts, prisoners were lined up, inspected, and separated. Leaders, skilled fighters, and those of notable rank were often singled out. They might be ransomed, imprisoned for life, or made to serve as hostages. Common soldiers, many were destined for labor. Fields, mines, or construction awaited them. Their past deeds didn't matter anymore. Only their usefulness. Captivity was also psychological warfare. Victors displayed prisoners to remind the population of their power. Public humiliation was common. Chains, shaved heads, or branded marks made individuals visible symbols of defeat. The goal was clear: fear and obedience were the tools of empire. Medical care was minimal. Wounds from battle often festered, infections were common, and those too weak to survive were left to die quietly. Hunger and thirst were constant companions. Guards allowed just enough food and water to keep people alive. Weakness wasn't pitted, it was exploited. The prisoners who endured this stage learned quickly to obey. Silence became survival. Submission became instinct. Every glance, every step, every word could determine life or death. The defeated learned the hard truth. Once captured, their fate was no longer theirs to control. And yet, amidst despair, some still held on to hope. They watched, remembered, and waited for moments of mercy, distraction, or opportunity. Every empire, every army had its cracks. Survival often depended not on strength alone, but on wit, patience, and luck. For many, this processing stage was more terrifying than the battlefield itself. The noise of battle was over, but the true challenge, enduring captivity, had only just begun. Once processed, prisoners were thrust into a new reality. Captivity was no longer about a single moment, it was a daily struggle. In ancient empires like ancient Rome, the defeated became laborers, slaves, or tools of state. Their hands were tied, not just with ropes or chains, but with the unyielding weight of fear and submission. Labor was relentless. Prisoners were forced to work in mines, on construction projects, or in fields under scorching sun or freezing cold. Every step measured by the guard's watchful eye. Any sign of weakness, resistance, or defiance could result in punishment: whippings, beatings, or extended chains. Sleep was scarce. Food was meager. And those who fell behind often disappeared, never to be seen again. But life in captivity wasn't only physical. It was psychological warfare. Prisoners learned to live with uncertainty. Days were counted by exhaustion, not sunrises. Conversations were whispered or avoided. Trust was dangerous. Submission became instinct. Hope existed, but it was fragile, a fleeting thought that could vanish at the first hint of violence. Some prisoners adapted, finding small ways to survive. Sharing scraps of food. Helping one another in secret. Using memory and wit to avoid guard scrutiny. Others cracked under pressure, their spirits broken long before their bodies gave out. Even in chains, prisoners observed, memorized, and learned the rhythms of captivity. Guards, schedules, and punishments formed patterns that, if understood, could be navigated, sometimes to a prisoner's advantage. Survival became an art. Every day was a choice: endure, adapt, or perish. For those who survived this stage, the battlefield was a distant memory. But the lessons of defeat lingered. Captivity reshaped them. It was not victory or defeat alone that defined a soldier, but the ability to endure what came after the fight. For the prisoners who survived marches, processing, and relentless labor, the final question remained: what would become of them? In ancient times, the answer was rarely simple. Some were sold as slaves. Cities and armies often profited from the defeated, turning warriors into tools for others. Mines, farms, households, anywhere. Hands could work. A soldier who once wielded a sword now carried stones, tilled fields, or built walls for a future he could not imagine. Their freedom was gone, replaced by a life of servitude. Others were executed. Not always immediately, but selectively. Leaders, particularly defiant fighters, or those considered dangerous, were publicly killed as warnings to others. The act was both punishment and spectacle, a lesson that survival on the battlefield did not guarantee life afterward. Death became a tool for control, teaching fear and obedience. Some rare prisoners found themselves ransomed. Families or states might pay to free them, trading wealth for human life. These moments were fleeting, however, and only for those of high status or luck. For the majority, fate was determined by strength, endurance, and the whims of those in power. Escape was possible, though nearly impossible. Some seized moments during marches, labor, or chaos in city centers to flee. But without weapons, allies, or knowledge of the land, freedom was a fragile hope. Many who tried were captured, or killed, making survival an unforgiving gamble. Ultimately, the aftermath of defeat reshaped the lives of thousands. Soldiers who survived the battlefield entered a world as harsh as war itself. Captivity, labor, or death awaited them, and the lessons of war extended far beyond the clash of swords. Ancient battles did not just claim lives on the field, they claimed futures. And the prisoners who endured carried the scars, the stories, and the warnings of what happened after the fight, reminding the world that war's consequences reach far beyond the battlefield.